President Biden has positioned himself as the most pro-abortion president in U.S. history, and the rest of his party is following suit, with a few exceptions like Senator Joe Manchin, as we just highlighted earlier in this show. And so extreme is the left on the issue of abortion that they are reluctant to ever acknowledge the humanity of an unborn baby, even when the mother wants to keep the baby. Listen to this exchange that took place between Congressman Ralph Norman and a witness just yesterday in the House Committee on Oversight and Reform.
Mrs. Easy, you're familiar with if somebody is accused of a double homicide, killing a mother while she's pregnant, are you in favor of redoing those laws where that, I mean, if you're in favor of abortion, is if the killing of a child and a mother is a double homicide, would you change the laws in the state?
I'm in favor of everyone having equitable and fair access to health care, which I believe abortion is.
Now, I'm talking about double homicide. Should that be changed?
Again, I believe that abortion is health care, and I just don't see it the way that you do.
What's your definition of homicide?
I said I don't see abortion as homicide. I see abortion as health care. So, and for me, there can be no limits on health care. There can't be any circumstances, restrictions. Health care should always be free, equitable, and everybody should have access.
Yeah, but you're not answering my question. If you could take the life of a child, why is it a crime if you shoot a mother and a child in the womb? Why is that a crime? And do you think the crime ought to be changed so that it's not double homicide?
I think what's really important is to focus on.
I appreciate it. Thank you. You're not answering my question.
Joining me now to talk about the worldview implications behind this exchange is David Closson, who's the director of the Center for Biblical Worldview at Family Research Council. David, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Joseph.
Now, I know you were able to hear that. What do you think it means when someone is unwilling to answer a very clear and direct question?
Yeah, it shows, Joseph, what happens when even the most extreme pro-abortion advocates are confronted with just, the facts of what an abortion actually is. So that activist, Mahila Azizi, she's from Texas. She's an abortion storyteller. And I Googled her earlier today, and she actually has a lot to say and is very passionate and very vocal in other contexts. But when the congressman asked her just very clearly about the double homicide, all of a sudden she had nothing to say. And the reason she had nothing to say is because everyone, including her, knows that we're talking about a human being when we're talking about the unborn. And sometimes those tricky little moral details are even unescapable.
Do you see that exchange as simply talking point discipline? Because certainly, she's testifying before Congress. She was in the office over the last week going over questions that they were going to get with staff. And she was told, this is how you need to answer these questions. And on some level, she was just, as they would say, staying on message. Do you think that's what she was doing, just staying on message? Or was there something deeper here, given the question that was being asked?
Well, I think she was trying to stay on message, but she actually kind of let something slip there. She said, abortion is health care, and I believe that there should be no limits for healthcare. So what she's admitting right there is her position, and this is now the official position of the Democrat Party, is that there should be no limits on abortion. 1 week ago, Joseph, if anyone doubts where the Democrat Party stands on this, Speaker Pelosi brought to the floor the Women's Health Protection Act, and it passed. Every single Democrat minus one voted for a bill that legalized abortion up until the moment of birth. And not only does it codify Roe v. Wade, it would, if this were to be passed by the Senate and signed by the president into law, it would negate every single state-level pro-life law on the books, of which there are 500 that have been passed in the last decade. So even just an exchange like this in a committee is deeply revealing of the worldview behind abortion advocates and, unfortunately, the entire Democratic Party now.
I want to get into the details of this bill, but I also want to finish this conversation that she was having with Congressman Norman. He asked this question about the definition of homicide, because he was making the point that in most of the country, and I'm not even sure it's not all of the country, if you murder a pregnant woman, you can be accused of 2 homicides. Why was that a question she was uncomfortable answering?
She feels uncomfortable answering it because if she admits that it's a double homicide, she's admitting that the unborn child is a human being. And as Christians, we would say someone who's made in God's image. And see, that's the language of moral euphemism and obfuscation that the left is forced to use, because at the end of the day, abortion is simply, if we define the word abortion, it's the intentional killing of an unborn baby. And so this is the language of the left, these euphemisms, this obfuscation, this dodging, and they have no other option, Joseph, because if they were being honest, she'd have to say that she's in favor of the intentional killing of a human being, which is something she doesn't want to say.
Right, because that is bad messaging to say, hey, we're okay with killing kids as long as that kid is not wanted. But that really is the basis of their message. And they don't want to get into the conversation. They don't want to ask those questions. But I think, in fairness, as we talk about just worldview broadly, and we're seeing what her worldview is, that this is not the only scenario in which people are afraid to ask questions or answer questions. They're afraid to confront the standards that they are proposing for the rest of the world. And I think what she's doing here is essentially saying, I don't want to think about that because I'm unwilling to consider or reconsider whether the things that I say are true actually are true. And your questions are asking me to reconsider those things. That's something I'm not willing to do. Isn't that a bipartisan problem and really just a human problem where people on both sides of certainly political discussions, but even philosophical questions about what is true ultimately in our lives, what should we be doing when we face a moment where there are questions we simply don't want to answer?
Yeah, and I think as Christians, one of the things that should define us as a people is that we are people who speak the truth. We are people of truth. Jesus himself said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. So, as Christians, we're people who shouldn't be afraid or ashamed of talking clearly, of talking directly about the moral issues we face. And there are a lot of moral issues we face. Some of them are tricky. Some of them require multi-levels of conversation. The issue of human life shouldn't be one of them. But I think one of the things that's helpful about even seeing this exchange and even really the whole hearing that took place the other day is this hedging and this dodging that takes place, because people don't like to have these frank conversations when it comes to the issue of abortion.
I think that's exactly right. But I think it's a teachable moment for all of us that we need to care more about the truth than an opinion that we have at the moment. And when we reach those moments where we get angry about questions that are asked because we don't like the implications of those questions, where there are questions that we are unwilling to answer, facts that we are unwilling to consider, that may mean that we are more interested in our particular position or our opinion than we are in the truth. And as Christians, we can't ever be there. If we are truly truth seekers, that means we're never afraid of information. It means we're never afraid of questions, because we're always trying to find out if we're wrong about something, because ultimately the goal is not to defend our current position, but to make sure that our current position is as consistent with truth as it can be. Now, David, there's another exchange that I want to get into here. This was with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib against a pro-life witness. The accusation is made that pro-lifers aren't really pro-life because they don't rally behind Black Lives Matter. I want to play that clip and then get your response to that as well.
When are we going to actually call this out for what it is? This is about controlling women in our country, period. Stop pretending it's anything but. I want to know, Dr. Scott, honestly, what are you doing about infant mortality rate among Black children? Have you testified in a committee about it?
Thank you for your question. I'm very interested in the topic. I have applied to be a member of the Texas Maternal Morbidity and Mortality Committee 3 times. I have not been accepted. Mm-hmm. I suspect it may be because of my stance on life, but I'm terribly concerned by the lack of support that so many of those women have?
Yeah, well, the same people that voted for the bill that you are championing today are people that would actually leave them completely homeless and with no safeguards at all. I want you to believe me when I say that to you, because Black Lives Matter should be very much at the forefront in every policy that we ever do in this country.
What's your reaction to that, David?
Well, I think it's actually deeply ironic. You were Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, part of the Progressive Caucus, the Squad. She's really obviously agitated and animated. She's talking to Ingrid Skopp, who's a very respected OBGYN in Texas. And what's really ironic is that one of the things they're talking about is this Texas heartbeat bill, the law that was allowed to go into effect a couple of weeks in Texas. Well, by one account, Joseph, I read this morning, is 4,500 babies are alive today because that law was allowed to go into effect. And if you look at the statistics, I think the vast majority of those babies are actually minorities, black and brown babies. And so it's just really interesting to see her get all excited and animated about this and saying that Black Lives Matter, needs to be part of our decision making when it comes to policy. And yet she's, again, hedging and dodging and kind of diverting from the main thing that this hearing was all about, which was the abortion issue.
And Congresswoman Tlaib there is clearly agitated. I don't think she's not just like having a policy discussion. There's something that's deep and emotional and personal for her in this issue. Why do you think that is?
I think it just shows, Joseph, back in the 90s, Democrats used to say that they believed abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Nowadays, it doesn't need to be safe. It should be completely legal up to the point of birth, and it should be subsidized by the federal government. Abortion, when you and I have talked about this before, it really has become a sacrament of the left. It almost has this religious, spiritual significance, and that's why you see Democrat politicians willing to go on the mat to fight against any sort of pro-life law. Again, the bill they passed last week gets rid of informed consent, waiting period, ultrasound requirements, just common sense laws that protect babies, that make sure women are able to make good, informed healthcare decisions. And yet you see it in this Congresswoman's outrage and others like her. They're guided by this absolute religious-like zeal and commitment to abortion.
And I think right under the surface of that, their commitment to abortion, in my judgment, is part of their desire to be in control of their life. And I think for those who are the most zealous advocates of abortion, is they see it as a doorway to autonomy. They see it as a way to solve problems and make sure that nothing is ever going to happen to them that they don't have control over, that they can't fix. And I think that in part explains the emotional response we see from Congresswoman Tlaib. But I want to ask you a question about the accusation that she made. For you, David, as a pro-lifer, as an outspoken pro-lifer, and also a white male, which of course makes you a suspect person already, is this really just your desire to control her body?
No, absolutely not. And every Christian should tell you, our concern for the unborn is because we believe that every single person is made in God's image, born and unborn. Theologians talk about that phrase, made in the image of God. At the very least, it means that we are more like God than anything else in creation. So, the whole abortion debate is absolutely framing the conversation the wrong way. I don't want to control anybody's body. All I want to do is protect the bodies of unborn children who are being deprived their fundamental right to life because this country is one of only 7 countries that allows abortion after 12 weeks. People around this country look at us like we're barbaric, the Western world with our rights and our liberties, but we're one of only 7 countries, including North Korea and China, that allows abortion after 20 weeks. And so, no, the pro-life movement is animated by love for all people, mothers and children, and that we can't let the left hijack this conversation to be about something that it's not.
David, I think one of the reasons as well that they are so agitated on the issue of abortion right now is because of what happened in Texas with this heartbeat bill going into effect, and because of the Dobbs decision, the Dobbs case that is going to be heard in front of the Supreme Court. Tell us why that case is important, and tell us about the resources that have come together to help the church really rally around this.
Yeah, so the Dobbs case, it's a 15-week abortion ban coming out of the state of Mississippi. Oral arguments are set for December the 1st. And Joseph, we've talked about it before, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade. And so actually, FRC, we're part of a multi-group, multi-denomination effort with Alliance Defending Freedom, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And we're putting together actually an event to bring pastors together to begin learning about this issue so they can get equipped to inform their congregations. All this information actually is available at prayfordobbs.com, prayfordobbs.com, where you can learn, and if you're a pastor watching this show or you have a pastor and you want them to be a part of this, you can just go to prayfordobbs.com and sign up for this webinar and learn more about this case and why it's so significant.
Prayfordobbs.com. It is potentially a landmark case, and the entire church should be praying because ultimately we know that this is a spiritual battle and not purely a political one. But David Closson, we appreciate your time as always and coming to enlighten us today. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Joseph.